Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrien Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. When we look back over the last 7 days, it was the end of last week that brought in some of the most soggy weather here across parts of the southeast, where some locations here picked up additional 2 to 3 inches of rainfall. Zooming in right here on North Carolina, we can see widespread rainfall amounts stretching all the way from the Appalachian Mountains down to the Piedmont, almost to the coastal plain, where we saw 1.5 to some locations over 3 inches of rainfall. If there was a quarter that was drier, it was right in through here where rainfall amounts struggled to get above a ½ inch. But outside of that, pretty wet into the week last week. Now, as we get into the forecast for this upcoming week, a lot of the action early in the week is going to be to our north. We have winter storm watches, winter storm warnings stretching out in this area, flood watches out and through here. But really for us in the Carolinas, as this system finally moves out of the central part of the United States, it won't be until Tuesday afternoon, evening before we start to see some of the adverse effects from this. Now, while today the severe weather threat is tucked away in the lower Mississippi River Valley down here in the Delta, where there could be potential for some very strong thunderstorms, even including some tornadoes down here, as the frontal boundary that slides through here moves over toward North Carolina, we're not going to be anticipating much severe weather as we get into the day tomorrow. So you might be hearing about a lot of the severe weather in the south today, but that's not going to translate east with time. So what are we expecting? Well, over the next 4 days here, so this gets us out to Thursday evening. This is kind of our broader scale view of the total accumulated precipitation out of this system as it moves through. And zooming here kind of in on the southeast, but we can start to see some of the numbers here in North Carolina. We do have the potential, like I said, for some storms to move through this area Tuesday afternoon and evening, but it's going to be a lot of hit or miss across the state. So some locations may get some heavier rainfall as some of those thunderstorm cells sit over you for a little bit longer and dump a little bit extra rain. But outside of that, much of the bad action, if you want to call it that, is going to be tucked away here, parts of the mid-south, and then snow to the north and east of that. So we got a lot to be talking about here. Let's dig into it, all right? After that system goes through, day 4 through 10, so this is again looking primarily at the end of this week and the majority of next week, is relatively quiet for much of the eastern half of the country. But we will be having to talk about a system to be watching over the weekend that could emerge right here out of the Gulf of Mexico and just come up here, bringing in some precipitation. But other than that, things are relatively calm as we progress through the rest of the week after the system comes through on Tuesday. And just kind of see what our temperatures are doing here. Over the next 5 days, we do actually see a cooler bias in our temperatures. And the warmth you're seeing here is just what we're getting out ahead of the system that's coming in on Tuesday, but it's going to be cooler behind that. And then as we get out into the days 5 through 10 time period, broad ridge kind of happens in the midsection of the country, and we'll see troughs flanking both the west and east coast. So you can see we're going to be hanging on to a near average temperature bias, but you'll see in a few moments that the fluctuation is actually quite rapid. It's just when we average it out do we get near average here. So what are we watching? Well, let's animate the upper level winds right now. We have this deeper trough that is sitting in through this area, and as we are developing that trough, there is one piece of the polar jet stream here, piece of the subtropical jet stream here, and that's coming together to make a low pressure system here. We'll be under the ridge out ahead of this, and that's why we see here as we animate these winds again that temperatures will be rebounding today out ahead of the precipitation I'm expecting to see tomorrow. And to show you what that looks like, well, let's start this off early Monday morning and let it play through. This is getting into Tuesday around mid-morning. So it'll be at that point that the system finally lifts toward the northeast and the rain comes through the Appalachian Mountains mid-morning and then out onto the Piedmont, the coastal plain by the time we get, well, this is Tuesday afternoon about 1 o'clock. So that'll be the time period. Let's just start it right here, right around Raleigh. This will be around noon, getting through about 6, 7 o'clock that evening. That'll be the best chance in the midsection of North Carolina to be getting some rain. And it's off the coast by the time we get into around midnight on Wednesday morning. Okay, so that's our first system. And then look, after this, yeah, we got some cooler air that comes in, but things are relatively calm throughout much of next week, or much of this week, and the start of next week. So if we kind of just take a look at total accumulated precip I'm expecting, now this is coming from the European model here, looking at just again through Thursday evening. We're going to have to watch where these storms set up, but you can see here kind of enhanced by the mountains, the potential here for picking up in some locations over an inch. And it's interesting to see kind of lining up with the Blue Ridge Mountains, some banding structure here here to the precipitation as it comes through. So let's see if it really does set up like that. But given the low pressure system yanking off to the north and east, that frontal boundary will kind of lay right here parallel to the Blue Mountains. So this will be, or the Blue Ridge, Blue Ridge Mountains. So this will be something I think that'll be neat to watch as the precipitation comes through. Okay, so now let's take a look at our European model, which takes us out 10 days. So we've talked about system number 1. There it goes through. Behind it, higher atmospheric pressure comes in with some windy conditions initially, but higher pressure moves in here, and that calms things down through the end of the week. Now, as this high moves just off the coast, in the upper levels of the atmosphere by the end of the week, so here are Friday morning, there's a little trough sneaking through Texas. And what it's going to do as we get into the day on Friday is you start to see something taking shape here coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Well, this is a weak little low pressure system that might possibly by Saturday morning, getting into Saturday afternoon and evening, be able to push some precip up into North Carolina. Now, the GFS model has this much more rapidly pressing off to the east, and therefore you'll probably see in your local forecast not too much of a chance for rainfall by the time we get into next Sunday. But the European model's clued in on this, and I'm going to watch it quite carefully throughout the week to see if this emerges. So that's our next chance at precip. It would be next Saturday afternoon and evening. So that moves out here, and then we see that things calm down after that. So let's just go ahead and let this run on out. This is this is Christmas Eve, the beginning of Christmas Eve. There's Christmas Eve morning right there. And what we notice is that the overall flow pattern of the atmosphere out at that point currently with our operational models is to bring in higher pressure for you. So this could mean a pretty decent several days around Christmas for travel, as it looks like the best chance for getting some adverse weather at that time is going to be tucked back over here in the midsection of the country. Both the GFS on the left and the European on the right producing a low pressure center in this area with, as you can see, our higher pressure in control over the southeast and over the mid-south, and also getting into the mid-Atlantic there. So that's a broad area of relatively, I'll call it protective weather flow, keeping things away from adverse weather around Christmas. Now, it's pretty far out in the forecast. We're about 10 days out from Christmas right now. So we'll keep a close eye on this and see how things evolve here. But just wanted to give you the latest kind of longer range outlook for that time period. Now, what do we notice? Looking at the GFS ensemble on the left, European ensemble on the right, we do see that as we get out past Christmas, so this is fully into week 2, well, a deeper trough is going to be setting up over the southwestern United States while ridging kind of builds in this direction. And both models are advertising a pickup in the flow pattern in the midsection of the country toward more active weather systems. And that, of course, as you know, translates east with time, which means maybe between Christmas and New Year's we could have a very active time period. And again, this follows this idea I've had for a while now that because the North Pacific remains unblocked, we are seeing pretty rapid transition of weather systems, such that we go about 4 to 5 or 6 days where things are active. That's the period we're in right now. Then they calm down for about a week, and then they get right back on it again. So let's see how this continues to play out. Now, bigger picture things. PNA, NAO, what are these talking about? The PNA is the Pacific North American pattern, and the NAO is the North Atlantic Oscillation. You see that both of them are going negative with time here. And what does that mean? That means we will be seeing troughs flank both the western side of the United States and the eastern. Okay, so let's see what that means in terms of upper level flow pattern. And here we go. Right now on Monday, remember, this is the main trough we're currently dealing with the ridge over us keeping things warm. Well, this is producing the low pressure center here that's going to initially make some severe weather to the south and then bring rain through us on Tuesday. So let's see that trough sweep through right there. This is now Wednesday morning. So yeah, we've got this cold front that sneaks through, cold air arriving and sticking around. But look at the ridge building in the midsection of the country, such that by the end of our week, temperatures are on the rebound. Now, at this particular time, Friday morning, see the trough right here? This is the one that moves through Friday, such that by Saturday morning's emerging out of Louisiana, getting over toward the Florida Panhandle, creating another low pressure system right in through here. So this was the one that comes through on Saturday, bringing the chance for precipitation back into North Carolina. But that moves on out quickly, see there? And by Monday, we now have broader ridging in, so our temperatures rebound once again. So I told you we're on a pretty rapid fluctuation in temperatures. It's at this point we definitely see that the West Coast negative PNA troughing, off the East Coast troughing, and that's the negative NAO. And in between the two, we're right now getting, broader ridging at this point, and that is your snapshot for Christmas midday. And that's why we expect to see more activity here in the midsection of the country coming out of this trough and into that ridge. That's where we get most of the activity. So could be that as we get out here to the day of Christmas, that a larger protective ridge could be in place, keeping the weather a bit more settled and therefore be more beneficial to what travel plans we do have for that day. But watch, ready? As I take you on out here to that week between Christmas and New Year, we do see, look at that, see the troughing sweeping into the midsection of the country? That gets things cranked up again, and that would be our week on in terms of active weather. What's it doing in terms of temperatures? Well, like I said, throughout the day today, let's just get this going and pause it really quickly here. There we go. Throughout the day today, temperatures are really going to be well above average as the flow comes out of the south ahead of that next low pressure system. But by Tuesday midday, you see the front advancing through North Carolina here. And as it does, though, see the extent of the colder air? That's why I gave you this blown out view. It starts here up in the Northwest Territories, comes through the Great Lakes states, and the main frontal boundary at this point comes all the way basically off the East Coast, cutting through Florida all the way down to the Yucatan Peninsula. So after this, though, remember, things begin to slowly rebound by the time we get out to about Thursday night into Friday. So see the temperatures moderating toward the very end of the week, such that by the time we get into Saturday, the only reason why we see some cooler weather here is just that cutoff low that might be in this area, bringing in some clouds and precipitation, might keep us a degree or two below normal. But remember, the ridge followed it, and we go back on our roller coaster with temperatures. And just to let you know, these are temperature anomalies early in the morning on Christmas Day. And we can see that the chances of us having a warm time period, middle of the week next week, is looking pretty good at this point. So that's what the European model is currently picking up on. What is helping is the fact that in the near term, the polar vortex is very strong. Now remember, the stronger the polar vortex, the more tightly it hangs onto the cold air sitting underneath this X. When we disrupt the position of the polar vortex, that's when we can potentially bring in some bitterly cold air. And what we're all trying to understand in the meteorological community right now is that the polar vortex, and this is just a different view of it, while strong right here and circulating, we see that as we get out to day 10, the 240-hour forecast, you see that the polar vortex is expected to break off into two pieces as ridges in the stratosphere pinch this off. But the stratosphere and troposphere are not really communicating very well right now. In other words, what's happening in the stratosphere isn't translating into the troposphere. Because normally when I'd see this, I'd say, whoa, eastern half of North America going into a brutal cold time period. We just don't see that. So we may have to watch maybe the middle of January before we get a real connection between the troposphere and the stratosphere. What's the bigger player? Well, you know I've been going on and on about this really powerful Indian Ocean Dipole event. And it's been one that we've seen a lot of rising motion here over this part of Africa and sinking motion over Indonesia and Australia. We've been looking at this diagram quite a bit, where these colors here, these cooler colors, represent rising motion, and the warmer colors you see in through here and over in through this area represent sinking motion. Well, I hope you've noticed that this graph looks a lot different than the ones I've been showing you. And that's because the Indian Ocean Dipole has been collapsing. And as it has been collapsing, we're losing this, well, one of our most dominant weather features we've had since the end of August. So what's going to take over? The MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. Now, because the Indian Ocean Dipole has been dominating things, the MJO has been sitting and spinning here, okay? But with time, it's going to emerge out, and if it gets cranking, just remember this. Phases 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's very important for South American weather, as that is the very dry phase for South American weather, and it's warm for us. Phases 7, 8, 1, and 2, as it comes over here, these are the cooler phases of the MJO for us here in North Carolina, and also the wetter phase. Remember, the MJO tends to follow in this phase diagram in a counterclockwise direction like this. It takes about 6 weeks normally to make one full loop. So you're going to hear me talking a whole lot more as we get into the month of January about the MJO, because it will not only be dominating our weather here, but also the weather in Australia and in South America, two other places where we grow quite a bit of cotton. Now check this out. This Tuesday across the continent of Australia, Nearly the entire thing will be covered with 100+ degree weather, with only the coast down here not seeing it. So they are in the middle of a major heat wave as the Indian Ocean Dipole right now is still in control, keeping the ocean sinking over the top of Australia. But as we finish this up over South America, over the last 30 days, the rain gauge network down there has really painted this corridor on the drier side of things. And it's important to look at that because that corridor is where we're going to see a lot of safrinha cotton being planted, that second cotton crop. And right now we see that from space, this region here is showing up with a lower vegetation health index value than it did a year ago. So we need to watch that carefully because in the next 15 days, that same area is showing up on the drier side of things as the monsoon prefers this corridor for heavier rainfall. So these are all things we need to be watching because it's going to be that second crop, the safrinha crop, that's going to be most critical. And just another thing to reiterate here, I've been hearing from multiple sources that due to some shortages in the amount of corn stored in Brazil, that they may increase corn acreage by about 40% going into that safrinha crop. And why that number is critical is because the safrinha crop is shared between corn and cotton. So we may be really putting some pressure on the cotton coming out of Brazil moving forward. So a lot to take in there, but that is kind of the bigger picture globally on what we're looking at. I hope you all have a great week, and I'll talk to you again next week just before the Christmas holiday. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you then. Thank you.